well, not yet. Oh no, I did it wrong. Oh well.
The Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
Shout out the 1962 World's Fair, the Space Needle. Good evening. I'm your host, Mario Magana. This is U.S. Phenomenon. If this is your first time here, we thank you. You can always text us at 775-990-5151. Thank you for making us the number one local paranormal radio show tonight. We haven't done this in a while, since probably the Halloween season, but it's time with everyone hanging out to kind of get back to find out where the haunted places are in the Northwest. Our guest tonight, Ross, will join us here in just a few minutes to chat about maybe some of the most haunted places in Seattle. Plus, he is going to break down in the second part of the show some of the paranormal investigations that he's done in the past and maybe some stuff he's working on now. It is my pleasure to welcome to U.S. Phenomenon, Ross from aghost.org. Welcome to the show, man.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's interesting. I know it's getting later. The sun's now, we've hit the summer solstice, and, it's that time of year where it is getting, we have light in the Northwest till almost like 8, 9 o'clock at night. But now that we're on the back end of the summer solstice, where now we start to lose daylight every, couple minutes every day, where, people are out going to nightclubs, doing dinners, things of that nature, around the Northwest. I got to ask you, where is one of the most haunted places that you've been to, maybe in the Seattle Pacific Northwest?
There's been so many. I've been investigating the paranormal for going on 30 years now, starting the oldest ghost hunting group in the Northwest. And I've had the opportunity to be the first to investigate a lot of places in the Seattle area. In fact, what even inspired me to do my Spooked in Seattle book and my Spooked in Seattle tours was the fact that I was always doing tours in every city I'd visit. And it's funny because as a paranormal investigator and you do a ghost tour and you hear these great places you want to investigate. And then me being an investigator, and I go investigate and I find that a lot of these stories are not real, that they made it up for the tour. I was really disappointed in that. So I actually started to do a lot more research and focusing my attention on bringing an audience the real stories, the real evidence that the Northwest has to offer. And Seattle was one of the biggest places that I could feature. And there's a lot of great places. And one of the places that I really focus my attention on is the Seattle Underground, because I've actually investigated that place a number of times.
And when you talk about the Seattle Underground, we're talking like right there on like by First and Yesler,
right
by the Merchants Cafe. I believe the club now is called Trinity Nightclub. I don't know if it's still the same.
That whole Pioneer Square area. Yeah. No, it's a great area. In fact, I used to be a tour guide for the Seattle Underground. And I actually had one of my first experiences being a tour guide there. In fact, this was featured on Ghost Hunters when they came to Seattle and investigated the underground. They interviewed me and talked about my experience when I was a tour guide. I was going around, shutting out the lights, locking up the doors. We were closing up for the day. And you go to turn out the lights, and all of a sudden this burst of air just shot right at me, and it was cold air too. And this was summer, so it was a pretty warm day, so you definitely could feel that temperature change.
Right.
And I just remember, and it was just a sudden strong blast of air right in my face, and then it was just gone, and I couldn't explain what that was. And then since then, I've had the opportunity to go back and do many investigations. And one of my favorite things that I've ever captured in the underground is EVP. Now, if anybody's not familiar with EVP, electronic voice phenomena, those voices that appear on recorders that should not be there.
Yeah.
I remember we were in the vault area and we had asked, what is your name? And the response that we captured on a recorder was Edward. Now, what makes this EVP stand out a little bit more is throughout the years, other groups have had the opportunity, I should say, other paranormal groups have had the opportunity to investigate the underground as well. And a team had reached out to me and said that when they were in the vault area, the exact same area we were, where we captured our EVP, they had asked the same question: what is your name? And the response that they got, and this is, they had not heard our EVPs, we had not communicated, but the response that they captured was Eddie.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
different name. I wonder different, possibly just someone different, or I wonder if he was playing, like a little bit of a game, like, oh, I'm gonna give a different name.
Well, it's still a similar name,
Right.
Edward or Eddie.
Yeah.
So it's just something like that just makes that experience a little more credible, especially when you have two different groups who had not shared their information, yet we both walk away with a very similar EVP. Even the voice sounds similar as well.
For those who can't picture, and I will give you a quick description. If you ever have not been downtown or have, toured the area or done the underground tour, what's interesting, if you just go to the Merchants Cafe as a patron, you can go downstairs to use the restroom and you get a little piece of that underground feel in the restroom. And what's interesting, when you go down the steps, it is like you're going back a whole nother, it's a time capsule essentially. But what's interesting to me is in those times, I mean, I just tried just to like go get in and get out, but everyone's like, oh, it's always, you just never know. But
it's funny. I was going to say it.
Feel. It's a different feel when you start to go down there. It's this damp, wet kind of feel. It's just a moist feeling when you go down down there. And I'm telling you go down there. I would actually try and psych myself out by going downstairs, using the restroom, walking, looking around just at the historical pieces that are down there, and then come back upstairs like. But
well, I was going to say, it's funny you bring that place up because I've investigated that place a number of times. In fact, if people aren't familiar, Merchants Cafe was featured on the Dead Files twice. So it is a notorious haunted place.
And there's a lot of places around the Northwest, or at least downtown, if you're touring, for other affiliates that may not be in the Seattle proper, like KOSW, our Ocean Shores affiliate down in Ocean Shores. If you guys come up and you're visiting some family, whatnot, and you're doing a late night dinner, maybe down at the waterfront, and you come up, I mean, there's so much to see, down there in the Pioneer Square district, up in Pike Place Market, another area as well. What about like old graveyards? Thoughts on those?
Oh, I've been to many graveyards all over the world. And people have always asked, why would a graveyard be haunted? Because you think, this is just where your body's laid to rest. But people don't understand that when it comes to a haunting, there's an attachment to a person, place, or thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there is attachment to your body. You don't know how to let go. And also, the fact of the matter is, graveyards and cemeteries were treated much differently back in the day. People did visit their past loved ones quite often. Now, we're too busy. We don't spend enough time reflecting on the dead by visiting them in cemeteries. But back in the day when families used to visit almost every weekend, that was the thing that maybe that's why, somebody would actually be haunting a cemetery, because their family always came to visit them there. But then there's also desecration. When you get a lot of these kids going in there thinking they're tough shit, I'm going to kick down a couple tombstones and show my girlfriend off, this is cool, see how brave I am.
Right.
That's going to be a reason why, somebody's going to want to haunt a location, because you just destroyed their last marker in the world, the proof that they ever existed. Because a lot of these people, especially in pioneer cemeteries, don't have that. They didn't have, social media like Facebook to tell their story after they passed on. All they had was this marker in a cemetery that identified their name and their age. That was it. And now you come into the cemetery and you destroy it, sometimes even taking it away from that location. I think I would be upset, if I was buried there.
Right.
So there's lots of little reasons why a cemetery could be haunted, and we have a lot of great haunted cemeteries in the Northwest as well.
I was just going to ask you, do you know of any that are haunted that are around here?
Oh yeah, Lakeview Cemetery,
Oh,
one of the oldest cemetery in the area. But it's funny too, because even before I get into Lakewood Cemetery, which is up on Capitol Hill, a lot of people don't realize, but there were actually quite a few cemeteries throughout Seattle that were moved for city progress.
that is correct.
And Denny Park is one of them. A
Now
lot
that-
of people have seen apparitions walking around Denny Park, and they don't realize that Denny Park used to be a cemetery.
Yeah. And then I think somewhere over by on Second, what was it? Over by whatever that theater is over there.
A Moore Theater?
Yeah, the Moore Theater. Yeah.
Yep. There used to be a cemetery over there underneath the Josephinium. I used to tell that one on my ghost tours when I did a ghost tour over in the waterfront area.
Now, and on those two spots, are there? You were talking about entities. Now, if someone was walking by and they may catch something on their peripheral vision, and they look back and it's gone? What is there like? Is there a ghost or is there an entity that is a staple that people are like, oh yeah, I've seen Mademoiselle, or I saw, the ghost of Mario, or in these two locations, or any other sites, or even the one in Capitol Hill?
Well, there is actually an interesting story of Buck, the horse. There's actually a horse that has been seen in Lakeview Cemetery quite often. And the story is that Buck was a beloved pet of a pioneer, or I should say early settler of Seattle. And he actually had it willed that when his horse died, he was going to be buried with his horse. Well, of course, his horse passed before him, so he had the horse buried. And there used to be a life-size statue of a horse in the cemetery. But people were up in arms. Like, how dare there be a horse buried in our cemetery? And so they demanded that he move the horse. Well, the rumor is that he only moved the statue and left the horse there so that he could still be buried with his horse secretly.
Aha.
But the story is that if you are actually walking around that cemetery, you may actually hear like the gallop or the horse hooves on the concrete sidewalks as you're walking around that area.
Interesting. I definitely gonna have to do a night tour of maybe get some ice cream, late night, go up to, and then just go to the cemetery, just kind of walk around the area and or by the fence. I'm sure they shut it at night where you can't go in, but to make that, just to have that presence and see if you can hear anything.
Well, if you actually did want to walk around in a cemetery at night in the Seattle area, just walk in the cemetery right next to it, the Gar Cemetery. That cemetery is interesting because there's over 300 men buried there. Wow. And the funny thing is they moved all the tombstones and left the bodies. And so it looks like it's just a big park with a tiny little cemetery, but people don't realize there are still bodies all over the park area underneath these people.
Oh my goodness.
They just moved all the tombstones to a central area, leaving the bodies where they were because no one wanted to take care of the cemetery, and it went abandoned for quite some time, since I believe the 1930s, if I remember correctly.
And they just gave the land back to the city as a park, right? Is that what?
Right. And so to make it maintenance easier, they just moved all the tombstones to one central area, opened it up as a park, and to reflect on the soldiers, and again just left the bodies where they are. So a lot of the reasons why this cemetery could be haunted is because, again, a lot of these men don't have their markers to identify that they were there. They were once part of the living.
And not only that, but what a little bit of a disrespect to someone who served the country, and then hey, by the way, hey, we got to do progress here, but we're gonna move. Not that you have a say because you're not here anymore, but we're gonna go ahead and move your tomb over here adjacent. But you're not going to be with. And yeah, I'd be a little upset too. Someone come in the park, man, I'm going to spook the heck out of them.
Oh yeah. No,
our guest tonight is Ross from aghost.org. hanging out with us this evening. Typically, we've done in the past. We've done a huge series called Spooktober, but it's not that time of year yet. And I thought, because we're in the middle of summer, everyone's out hanging out down at the waterfront, lakes, rivers, things of that nature. I got to ask you, do you have any haunted stories about lakes or rivers?
Oh my gosh. Let me think.
Not to put you on the spot.
No. It's funny. You wanted to bring up all the stuff about Seattle, and I had written the book Spooked in Seattle.
Right.
This was many, many years ago. It's got over 150 stories, and it's just like, oh my God, I'm trying to remember all these stories, I'm trying to think. The one thing that is of interest, I don't think it particularly is of a lake, but there is stories about some boats.
Oh,
yeah. The Sea King actually used to frequent Seattle quite a bit. And this actually was an old wooden vessel, and it actually served the Seattle, California area quite a bit, especially when a lot of cities were burning down. And what had happened was Seattle supplied a lot of lumber for a lot of the cities in and around the area. And so when San Francisco had their great San Francisco earthquake. Yeah. Of course, the ship was actually docked in San Francisco. So they decided that they were going to go ahead and head up to Seattle, and it survived the earthquake. It was fine because it was in the water. But they decided to send the boat up to Seattle, get some lumber, and come back. Well, a lot of people are unaware, but when a lot of these boats are going out to sea, they load up the ballast with a lot of heavy materials just to balance out the boat.
Right.
And so now San Francisco had tons and tons of debris that they had to get rid of after the earthquake. And so they just dumped all this debris from all these buildings that came down and after the fires, and just put it into the ballast of the ship. And then they set the ship off to San Francisco to get some lumber. And of course, during the trip to Seattle, a lot of the crew were having a horrible time. They said that they just kept hearing the moans and cries of men and women and children. And they couldn't explain it. They were just like, what the hell's going on? Is this ship cursed or whatever? They didn't know what was going on. And so finally, when the ship finally made it to Seattle and they started to unload the ballast, they uncovered bodies from the San Francisco earthquake.
Oh no, these people were alive on the boat screaming.
Well, they don't know if they're alive.
Oh.
But they did discover bodies as they were uncovering, dumping out the ballast.
Oh, hey, I wonder where they were putting all that weight at.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
so
man.
Ever since then, that ship unfortunately was considered a cursed ship, and no one wanted to work on it.
I mean, would you? I mean, I know. I don't know that I would do that. Our guest this evening, we're talking about haunted places around the Northwest, maybe around the world. And I know you've talked about this prior to we coming on the show. That you've done a lot of investigation. We'll talk about that coming up next here in the second half of the show. But I mean, there's so many places. Maybe you can share with us maybe one of your favorite haunted places, maybe in Seattle or anywhere else.
Oh, you bet. Like I said, I've been all over the world.
Right.
So it's really hard when, people say, oh gosh, can you tell us the most haunted places you investigated? And I've been to a number of the most notorious haunted places around the world. I've been to Amityville House. I got to walk around through the house. So that was a pretty amazing experience. I didn't experience anything. Chillingham Castle in the UK, got to spend the night there and had some interesting experiences there. So people need to understand when it comes to hauntings, it's all about being at the right place at the right time. So you're not always guaranteed to have a paranormal experience, even though you're paying, $100, $150 to spend the night there. But I have had some pretty incredible experiences. And I will have to say that one of my most interesting experiences that people love to hear about is my experience at St. Louis University. And St. Louis University is where the true Exorcist case took place.
Oh,
Now, if you're not familiar with the case, they made movies about it, but the main movie, The Exorcist, with Linda Blair, the story is actually about a little boy, and they gave him the name Robbie to protect his identity.
okay.
And so I was brought to the campus because around Halloween time, I do a lot of lecturing at colleges and universities on the haunted. And so I was invited out there to do my lecture. And after I do my lecture, I'll take the students on a ghost hunt around the campus. And so they took me to the building right next to the church that was involved in the exorcism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, the church had owned this building at one time. They have now sold it to the campus. So this is why we had access to this building.
Okay.
And they, took me through all the different floors. And when we got to the fourth floor, I was surprised that it was completely abandoned and run down. I mean, there's graffiti everywhere, holes all over the place.
Right.
And it was huge up there. And I was thinking, gosh, why doesn't the campus utilize this space? They could have made it dorm rooms or something. They could have done whatever they wanted up there. And they said that they've had so many problems on the fourth floor that they've completely abandoned it. And when they mean by problems, they're referring to paranormal problems. And so little did I know that back when the church owned it, they had actually had the boy stay in this building on the fourth floor. And the story is, if you are not so familiar with the story, is the church believed that they could not perform a full exorcism on the boy inside the church because they believed that this could possibly kill him. So they moved him to various secret locations, performing multiple exorcisms on the young man, believing that every time they performed an exorcism, some of the demons would escape, believing that it's more than one.
Wow.
So I was going around on the fourth floor. We're going through all these different rooms. We're doing our little investigation. And I'd walked into this one room. And right when I walked into the room, I heard this crunch underneath my feet. And I looked down and I realized I had stepped on a dead bird.
Ooh.
Now, this is not unusual for me. I've been in a lot of abandoned places, so you find dead animals every so often. So I just kind of kicked it over to the side so no one else would step on it. But then when I flashed my flashlight through the rest of the room, I was surprised that the room was just filled with dozens and dozens of dead birds. Now, I've been through most of the fourth floor, so I had not come across anything like this. And another thing that's really odd is security had removed all the doors on the fourth floor, because the biggest problem they had is a lot of times students will sneak up there to scare each other.
Oh, yeah.
So it just made it easier for security to make their rounds if they didn't have to go and open and close doors.
Right.
So I realized that these birds had access to the whole fourth floor. But why did they all choose to die in just this one room?
I was just going to say.
Well, come to find out, this is the room that the boy had stayed in.
Oh.
Yeah. So I give some of the students some of the basic equipment that they can use on an investigation.
And what would that be?
And we're talking, they had EMF detectors, they had, temperature gauges, we had a compass, a few other things. And we're in this room for less than 5 minutes when all of a sudden all the equipment starts to go off at the exact same time.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh my God, this is really happening. So for me, being a paranormal investigator, I got to document this. I got to prove that we're really experiencing this. And a photo is not going to prove that.
Right.
So luckily, I switched my camera over to video and I start filming everything that's going on, trying to document this the best I can. And I start filming everything that's going on, the equipment going off. And, we're talking the temperature started to drop. And I could feel the room getting colder and colder, almost to the point where I'm expected to see my breath anytime soon. We're talking the EMF detector's going off like crazy, and we can't figure out what's causing the EMF readings.
Right.
And the compass is spinning around and around and around and around, and it will not stop. So I'm trying to document this, all right? And it starts to slow down a little bit. So I realize, okay, before it completely stops, I'm going to try for some EVP. So I start to ask questions into the air. And I happen to ask the question, can you tell me whose room this is? And there's about 12 seconds of silence. And then all of a sudden I start to hear crying to the left of me. And I turn and I realize that a couple of the female students have started to cry because they're so terrified being in this room. And I realize, okay, they're uncomfortable. I'm a little uncomfortable too, because I don't have my normal ghost hunting group. This is just a bunch of college students following me around.
Right.
So I realized, okay, for safety reasons, let's go ahead and wrap this up, and we'll, hopefully I can come back and do my own little investigation later.
Right.
Well, I didn't get a chance to go back and do an investigation, but I did when I finally got home after my lecture tour and started reviewing all my evidence. I got to that video, and I got to the part where I'd asked the question, can you tell me whose room this is?
Right.
Now, I'm going to edit this because I don't want to offend your audience here, but it basically says, F you, it's mine.
Oh, that's creepy.
Yeah.
Very creepy. As we get close to the bottom of the hour here, we're going to check in with Mark Christopher for our paranormal story of the week. We're going to do something a little bit different. Mark is going to check in and give us the latest Bigfoot sightings around the Pacific Northwest. We'll talk with Mark Christopher. Will give us a latest Bigfoot sightings around the Pacific Northwest. Also, when we come back, Ross will share some more stories, and we're going to talk to him about some paranormal investigations as we started to just now on the second half of the show. We'll be back. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Thank you, Mark. Interesting stuff, Mark. I'll have to, we got to do a map or something to find out where our paranormal Bigfoot sightings are at. So we can put pins on it, a virtual pin map or something of the state of Washington or maybe even around the United States. Our guest this evening, thank you for spending some time with us, is Ross from aghost.org, who has done investigations, done tours, ghost tours around the Pacific Northwest and around the world. And he's does his own paranormal investigations. And just a few minutes ago, if you missed it, you'll have to go back and listen to the podcast, either by going to Apple or Spotify. Just Google, make sure you just search U.S. Phenomenon, or go to onairmario.com to subscribe to the podcast and listen to his paranormal exorcist experience that you did in St. Louis. Welcome back to the show, Ross, and thank you for hanging out with us. Thank you for hanging out with us this evening. As
Anytime.
I get as we're talking, and I'm like, I had some chills as you were telling your story and how you and some of your guests, when you guys were touring the campus, how you were in that room. I started to get like the goosebumps from the story. And if you missed it, definitely go back and listen. We'll have all the information. Now, on some of these, like the pieces that you were talking about earlier, where you heard the guy say, hey, this is my effing room, or however he stated it. Do you still have that audio? Is that anywhere to be found?
I do. And I usually save it for my lectures.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people hear it. But if you look it up, a lot of times there are a few. I have sometimes if radio stations, reach out to me ahead of time and ask for evidence to share, I'll give them that to play. So
gotcha.
It is out there.
I know it's so taboo to talk about different places that are haunted, like the cemeteries, and just walking around. Pike Place Market has a lot of paranormal stuff. The old I can't even, like Kale's Irish Bar, huge. And I guess now that on the First Avenue side, there's a nightclub or bar on the First Ave side now. And I heard that was like one of a very notorious place where there was a lot of paranormal activity.
Oh yeah. In fact, I was the first to investigate that place. I investigated it, when it was Avenue 1. It used to be a restaurant known as Avenue 1 back in the day.
Yes.
We're talking like 20 years ago. So it was a great place because a lot of people don't realize that Kells used to be a funeral home.
Yeah. A mortuary. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's got a lot of history there. And there was a lot of great ghost stories and experiences, even through all the different floors. Even when you go down, to Kells below, you were talking about, stories of a little girl being seen quite a bit down there, doors opening and closing quite a bit down there. And as you go up through all the different floors, I remember because Avenue One was like one of the last restaurants that was there before it shut down for a long time. I mean, this place was abandoned for decades. And it was one of those places that we constantly had to work it out with Kells just to get in there to investigate that place. But it sat abandoned for quite some time, and the reason why is it had that notorious belief that it just suffered from a lot of bad luck. The businesses that tried to be successful there suffered a lot of bad luck because the spirits there just didn't like to be disturbed.
It's interesting because I was just going to ask you in that piece of when you walk by, if you've not been to downtown or at least that area of First Avenue, even when you walk across the street, and I always typically walk across the street just so that I can have the full view
Mm-hmm.
of the building. I'm going to be honest with you. Back in the day, it was very, grandiose. When you look at it now, it looks very Gothic, very, 19th century architect, and but it just has that spooky feel. Maybe because I know what the heck has gone on in there, that just has that. Now I'm like, I'm not walking over there, but I've gone Kale's many of times, and I have had. I don't know if it was Kale's or the restaurant down beneath on the. I forget that restaurant that's down over underneath the market. What is that place called? Well, it's
the other one was like Mr. D's.
Yeah,
there was that place. The market's got a lot of ghost stories around that area.
But is it is it that the entities, do we call them entities, ghosts? Is it that ghosts are more pissed, lost, just confused because they're stuck in this one place and they don't get to really leave, or they're not sure where their way is?
It's all the above, to be honest. Until we can sit down and have a face-to-face conversation like me and you on what it's like, most of it is a guessing game. We don't know why hauntings tend to happen. There is the unfinished business. There's the fact that they just are going about their life and not sure what's going on because there is confusion. But then there's also a lot of residual hauntings as well. Those trapped, memories and moments that just keep playing themselves out over and over. So right now, we're still so far behind in the research when it comes to trying to validate hauntings that we're still at the beginning of the race, just scratching that surface, trying to have a better understanding of what we're trying to do here and what's going on. But a lot of amazing, credible people have these experiences that we just can't explain.
Because we all see we're here in this physical realm and try to put ourselves or try to have that dimension of that other side where it's, at the end of the day, we just don't have that. We don't remember being born. We don't have that recollection. So for these people who may have died suddenly, or maybe they were with their body during during the preparations, and they're still stuck at now Cal's Irish Bar, or or whatever the restaurant or businesses that may be in that general area. It blows my mind that to think that you're hanging out having a beer, listening to some Irish music one day, and you feel this cold breeze go by, and you're like, hey, who was that? It just.
Well, that's the thing, too. We can't always assume just because Kells used to be a mortuary that what we're experiencing are people that died and their bodies were brought there. There's a lot of history throughout all those buildings.
Very true.
You're talking, early 1900s when, people were just going about their lives in and out of these buildings, all the businesses that have come and gone. So you can't always assume just because a tragic event happened there, that just because some woman was murdered in this location, that anytime people see a female figure walking around, that it's that poor woman that was murdered there.
Yeah, it wasn't Medusa or what. Not to make fun of I believe that there was once a club called Medusa downtown, but now as we talk about, we briefly touched your book, but some of the things that you get to do on the side where you're talking about where you had the opportunity to lecture and do paranormal investigations on those pieces? Typically, how long does it take you to do a prep before you even go into a facility or a building when you for a normal investigation?
Well, it really depends on the location and if I'm going to have the opportunity to return multiple times. Sometimes, especially when I'm traveling all over the world, some of these places are just a one shot. I get in, get out, and do my investigation. So if it's going to be a situation like that, then I prep myself, before I go out on my trip, trying to get as much information ahead of time. But if it's something that I have access to multiple times, then I don't like to be front loaded, because then I feel that it kind of triggers that psychological aspect of knowing too much. And so I train my team the Advanced Ghost Hunters of Seattle Tacoma, not to know too much information. Usually when we set up an investigation, there'll be a team lead that will have the information that can kind of direct us in the best way on how to do an investigation. But if I really do find that if people know too much information, it really does affect the investigation. And you don't know if you're really dealing with something that's paranormal or wishful thinking or something that's psychological. So I really feel that if you have the opportunity to not know anything and do an investigation, that is going to be the best way to do it. Because then when you do have those experiences and you've documented them, and then you go back and you research the property and you find out how much that ties in with the experiences you had, it just makes your experiences more credible. It makes the fact that this place is haunted more credible.
I mean, because you think about it nowadays, I don't know so much now, but go back 70s, 80s, where you would talk about this kind of thing and it'd be very taboo. Where now, I mean, there's TV shows on the regular. I mean, there's enough content available that you could go down a wormhole for hours on, like stories of, the Pacific Northwest or maybe the East Coast. And next thing you know, you're like, oh, now I'm on this castle in Great Britain, for God's sakes. I mean, it just goes on. There's so much content where
it is funny that you bring that up, because I remember I started doing this before the television shows were out there.
Right.
So, I was, in the Bay Area when I started, coming out of the closet as a ghost hunter, working with people like Lloyd Arbach and getting my, feet wet at that time and learning about the paranormal. Because back then you didn't tell people you were a ghost hunter, because most people would avoid you. They would think you were cuckoo. All right. And nowadays, you go to a party and you tell them you're a ghost hunter, you're a rock star. People want to hang out with you. They want to hear your ghost stories. They want to tell you their ghost story. So it really has changed quite a bit. Some for the better, because it is more acceptable now to believe in ghosts. But even some for the worse, because it's now become more competitive in the field. Because when I started my ghost hunting group, we were 1 out of 100 nationally. Now each state can easily have 100+ groups. That's how crazy it is.
That's, I mean, it's a thriving business, I guess, because people are dying still. But to have good, credible ghost hunters out there who aren't trying to
get a television show,
right? Or yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many variables, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want and even for us, for myself, I'm like, okay, we don't really touch this very often, but when we do, I want it to be something real, or a tangible, where maybe someone is like, well, shoot, I got a story. And that's where they can hit you up, or they're like, hey, I got this area that just seems to be odd. Do you know anything about this specific place? I mean, everyone talks about 13 Steps to Hell, the legendary stories about that. And we've covered that on one of our old shows in the very beginning, during Spooktober, about that. I mean,
I investigated that place too, just so you know.
We had a girl who was very much a young teenager who was able to share her experience, and and she was a young teen, and they all went down there and did the whole 13 steps. the older boys were drinking. That, of
Mhm.
course, I don't know that the story which is theirs. It is their testimony. I'm not going to knock it and say, oh no, they didn't have that experience, but whatever they had, they got spooked, or they had their experience at the 13 steps was quite interesting to me. But in the investigations that you've done, because now it is completely locked out where you can't even go there.
Right.
What did you find there?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Just to be honest with you,
Yeah.
I feel it's more of an urban legend. You're right. It was just a bunch of, teenage kids bored out of their mind, had nothing to do in the area. So why not hang out in a cemetery? And they just created this urban legend of these 13 steps to hell. And as you walk down these steps, you'll experience all this paranormal, phenomena. And I think it's just a little bit of that, a little bit of mass hysteria, a little bit of drunkenness, because they were drinking. And every time I've been out there was always, empty bottles all over the place. So, yeah, I just think it was just an urban legend that a lot of the kids enjoyed to scare each other.
You heard it first here, right on US Phenomenon, the exclusive. 13 Steps to Hell is really not even that. Well, it's funny you say that, because even going back to listen to the story, and I try never to judge anybody. It is someone else's story that they are sharing with us, allowing our guests or people who are listening to the show get to make the decision, like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
maybe they were drinking too much, or maybe it actually happened, and maybe they're like, I went there when I was young and I had an experience. So I try not to like bag on anyone's experience, because you just don't know. But
Well, when it comes to the paranormal, people don't seem to understand that too. There's a lot of the stuff that we're still exploring and trying to figure out what's going on. And some of the theories out there is it may not be ghosts, that we ourselves could project a lot of this stuff. And so when you put yourself in a situation like the 13 steps to hell and everybody's scared, especially if you're a young girl and your boyfriend's dragging you down there,
right,
you're probably terrified.
heck yeah,
You don't know what to expect. And so every little noise becomes amplified, 10 times, and you're terrified and you run out of there screaming. And you may not have experienced anything paranormal, but you're just put in that situation where fear can easily take over and alter your perception.
Our guest tonight, Ross from aghost.org. If you want more information, go to our podcast. We'll have all the information posted on the podcast. Now, let's talk about some other paranormal investigations that you've done. I know we briefly talked about one in the earlier segment, but let's talk about some other ones that you've done, or maybe one that you're working on now.
Well, if you want to talk about what I'm working on now, and I know you kind of briefly brought it up, how you want some tangible evidence, I'm actually filming a docuseries called Parasense. And I'm the first in history to try and prove touch. I was surprised that no one throughout history has ever tried to validate when people have these claims of, being scratched, pushed, even positive, where they felt a kiss, somebody holding their hand, these physical encounters with a ghost.
Right.
And I had a young man contact me, and this was about 6 years ago. And he was working construction in a brothel. It was an abandoned brothel at the time, but he was upstairs, doing some work, doing some sheetrock, and he was alone for a few minutes when all of a sudden something groped him.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Chills.
And so that when he tells me this experience, it's like, this is not the first time I've heard something like this. There's, hundreds of thousands of stories out there where people claim they've been touched by ghosts in various different ways. But it really got me thinking. It was just like, well, how do I validate these encounters when people say they've been touched by a ghost? Because it is a very personal encounter.
Right.
And so I just got to thinking, it's just like, well, is there experiments that have been done that we can try to bring back to the table and see if we can validate these? And I couldn't find anything. And I went through, books and documentaries, anything I could find to see if there was anybody throughout history that has ever tried to prove touch. And no one had. So from there, I just kind of came up with, some experiments, what I could do. And the first thing I came up with, well, if you're going to try and prove touch, you kind of have to see what's happening to the human body. right?
Yeah. Right.
So I realized, well, would people be willing to be naked in a haunted location? And surprisingly, I found people that were willing to be naked. So I put them in a haunted location in a controlled environment. They would sit there alone in this haunted room. We had cameras on them. We had thermal imaging because we wanted to see what was happening to the body.
Mhm.
Because if anything, people have had this discussion with me. It's like, why do they have to be naked? Well, if somebody has a touch experience, if somebody says, oh, something tapping me on my shoulder and they were wearing a shirt,
Right.
anybody in the scientific field is just going to say, well, it's contaminated because you're wearing a shirt.
Good
And
point.
so I was just like, well, nudity just kind of made sense if you're going to be really scientific about your approach.
Right.
So nudity just became the natural thing to do. And we started doing all these experiments, putting thermal imaging on them, and we started to get some interesting results. But it was still too limited. It wasn't enough that I could present this to the scientific field and say, hey, this is proof that ghosts exist. Look at this data. Until I reached out to a scientist. I actually had become friends with a gentleman known as Chad Goodwin. He had me on his radio show. He did like a scientific, community science radio show. And we had talked quite a bit about some of the ideas that we could bring to the field and help advance the field. And
it's funny. It's funny you say that because I used to work with Chad in radio.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so funny. I saw his post and saying that he was going to go on the big show, the competitor, the Coast to Coast, and I was like, very excited for him. Very excited. Yeah, so I excited for you guys because it's huge. That's a big thing. It's a very exciting thing. Now, everyone who listens to this show thinks that we're the other show, but locally. They think we're a local version of that show, which is very interesting because if you listen 4 hours prior to this one starting, you have Art Bell, Somewhere in Time with Art Bell. And
I was on Art Bell back in the day.
Right. Art Bell leads. Then from Art Bell comes me, and I do 1 hour, which is not much, but one's better than none. And we're, as I like to say, it's, I try to stay competitive. It's not me against George because George isn't on the same time as I am. And I have nothing but love for those guys. And I think that there's such a huge realm that even on the local spectrum here, that we can cover some stuff here that maybe on the national side that doesn't always get covered. So, but this is so awesome to have you on to talk about your guys' thing. I watched the pilot that he sent me, and I was like, God, this is good. This is going to be a good one. It looks very. I was walking around, and I'll be honest, I was like walking into Costco watching this. And I'm like, man, I'm glad it's not dark right now because I would be freaked out. But continue telling the story about what you guys are doing in your docuseries.
Oh, you bet. So I had reached out to Chad, and we had really hit it off. And he had talked to me about some ideas that he thinks he could bring to the field. And unfortunately, due to his scheduling issues, we never had the opportunity to reconnect and pursue these ideas. So now that I was doing this research for about 6 years and I really wanted to advance the research, I reached out to Chad and I said, hey, Chad, I'm doing this, what do you think I could do? Because if anything, he could at least give me some ideas.
Right.
And he was intrigued, because my question was if this was thrown in your lap, how would you prove touch? And we just got to thinking, and I invited him to join me one weekend when I went out back to that brothel out in Northport, Washington, and he actually was intrigued by what we were doing, and he ended up joining the team, and he's actually helped us create more advanced equipment, and we are able, for the first time in history, to track the phenomena. We can actually see when something comes into the room and then leaves, or comes up to the subject, I should say, and leaves. We've been able to do that for the first time in history. We've been able to document some interesting phenomena, and I don't want to give away too much because I always get in trouble by the producers. But yes, it's been an amazing experience. It's been doing so well. We're filming the next one this coming weekend. So we're excited about that.
I mean, that's so exciting for you guys, and love that it's, you guys are here. And for those who don't know where Northport is, this is in upper Eastern Washington. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. It's about 2 hours from Spokane, north of Spokane. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You would think there would be why a brothel up there, but again,
Well, wherever there were lonely men, come on.
true. And yeah, I mean, so it's funny you say that, because yeah, I mean, you would think, I just wouldn't think out in the middle of nowhere though, because it seems
a lot of these towns were lumbering towns.
Very true.
They were male dominant towns.
I mean, yeah, you're right here on the river too.
You have the lumbering. You had also mining was a big thing in Washington. So you had a lot of these men going out to these towns for the labor, but there weren't a lot of women. So if you wanted to make some extra money, a lot of these women had the advantage.
For sure. Now, in a situation like the brothel, or having these experiences where people are having these encounters without giving away too much, maybe we can talk about past experiences, but when you have them unrobed or naked, you're able to get a better sense of, with the body temperature, what's going on. Now, are they sleeping or are they just awake, just hanging out, chilling?
I've done all kinds of different experiments.
Yeah.
I've done an experiment where I've had them spend the night in the brothel, and we have cameras on them the whole time. And we actually captured some video footage where a young man was being fondled and it woke him up. So that happened. And then we mostly do controlled experiments where we'll have the cameras around them as they're sitting there alone in the room, and they're trying to contact whatever's there, trying to get them to respond to whatever experiment we're doing.
And if someone was very interested and they're like, oh, I want to watch this, where are they going to be able to watch this at?
Right now, it is available on Scare Network.
Okay, so that's on like they could download an app and go and watch.
You can download an app, or you can go to the website.
Okay. Again, our guest, who, it's so funny how this all turned right back into itself. I was like, oh yeah, I was like, Chad, you got to come on the show, and then here we are having you on to talk about ghosts. And then we're talking about your biggest, your guys' biggest thing right now. This is huge for this area to have. I had a guest on a long time ago, maybe within the year. Her name is Chase Koletsky. She's a ufologist.
Mm-hmm.
And she always said that, and she always says, she's like, the Northwest is home to a lot of paranormal activity. And
yet we don't get a lot of attention up here, especially with the media. We really don't.
Everyone talks about Roswell, and you get the UFO thing down there and whatnot. But I mean, this all, like, if people like go back and look in history, first UFO sighting allegedly was right here right by Mount Rainier.
Yeah,
and then
right.
You have the Murray Island incident over by Vashon Island on Murray Island. That whole incident that went down, the Men in Black and the whole 9 yards. This whole area is full of ghosts and paranormal activity, Sasquatch. I don't know about the chupacabra. I think that might be a little more further south, but
you can't forget the tree octopuses as well.
Now, have you ever heard about the story? Jeez, yeah. Have you heard about I've seen the art. I've seen the tree. I've seen the art over at Easy Street Record. You say that, and I kid you not. I was there just the other day, and I saw this octopus coming out of a tree.
Yeah, I know.
Very cute. But have you ever heard about Bat Squatch? Have you heard that story?
No, I haven't.
So I guess this story goes back, and Mark Christopher, who does our Paranormal Story of the Weeks, in a previous show, talked about how the Bat Squatch. Oh wow! It just stopped. The Bat Squatch just showed up after the Mount St. Helens eruption. I was like, my first question was, what was in the air that may have made people hallucinate?
Yeah.
I was like, is it something that from the gas that may have made people see this Sasquatch that combination. I'm like, and it made it in the paper. It made it in the Seattle Times or
Wow.
Post Intelligence. I was like, oh man. And even Mark and I were like, what a crazy story to be put in the Times in the 90s. We just, it was like, oh wow, you didn't think that would actually, transpire or take place. Quite interesting. It's funny as we continue to do the show. We always record them 6 ways from Sunday, the video blog, and then our computer over here, and of course during the record, because we want to have it for podcasting purposes, it just stopped, which is funny. So we'll have to get it from the stream. So again, our guest Ross hanging out with us this evening to chat about projects that he's done, ghost haunts that he's done, tours. You can see more of his work on aghost.org. And again, if you want to watch the docuseries that you're working on with our good friend Chad Goodwin, they can see this on the Spook Network. Is that what you said?
Scare Network.
Scare Network. Okay, so you go check it out on the Scare Network. We'll have a link.
Go scarenetwork.tv.
We'll have it in the podcast if you want to check that out. Again, thank you so much, Ross, for taking the time to hang out with us this evening. And of course, as we wrap things up from the Pacific Northwest, I'd like to thank you, Ross, for hanging out with us. They can find you at aghost.org. Your docuseries, again, what is the name of the docuseries called?
Parasense.
Ooh, that's a good one. And go watch it on the TV networks. We'll have all the links provided in the podcast. You can always go find us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple iTunes. Go to US Phenomenon or On Air Mario if you can't spell phenomenon. Again, as we wrap things up from the Pacific Northwest, I'd like to thank our guests, Mark Christopher for the Paranormal Story of the Week, and Jeff Jens for the website. And I'd like to thank Sophia Magana and myself, Mario Magana. Remember to look up at the sky because you never know what you might see. Good night. Man, thank you so much. That's awesome. What a fun show this evening to just do. Now I got to go back and extract the audio from the video here so that I can use the ending for the podcast.
You bet. Maybe you should have me and Chad on.
Yeah, no, I mean, all the time. We'd love to have you guys come back on. Now, when do you guys go on? When do you guys go on Coast, or did you guys already go?
No, we're due next month.
Next month, that's right.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah, they saw it and they thought it was amazing, so they wanted to talk to us about it because we're doing real science, not a lot of this bells and whistles and crap that you see on a lot of these ghost hunting shows. We're doing the real thing.
You'll have to tell me how it goes on the show. I'm very intrigued because I know I have my suspicions because I produce, but I want to know how that works out for you guys. You're not taping it, right? You're going to do it live. Or are you guys
for the George Nori?
Yeah. You're going to do it live?
It's going to be live.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, you're both on the same coast. So
yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll send you a link. The show will air this Saturday on our flagship station, 570 KVI. Then KGRG simultaneously will be on KGRG. Then Sunday it plays on our 2 other radio stations. So I'll send you links and all that fun stuff.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. You have a good evening.
Anytime.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Ross. Bye.